they got divorced, they kept the property, then they got remarried, and that's very, very common. So the misconception that this is only for the wealthy is not true. This is usually the investment property that they're exchanging is the biggest retirement tool for the taxpayer. So it is not a loophole. And actually, there was an Ernst and Young study done a couple years ago, which showed that 80% of exchangers do one exchange in their lifetime, and then they sell the property in their lifetime, and they actually pay taxes. That's 80%.
Point too about how this benefits everybody, because I'll see online people say like, oh, these investors getting away with not
Yeah.
paying their taxes. And it's like, well, the property they're selling is going to have a step up from the person that buys it. So the county is going to be collecting more property tax on it. And to your point, you have lenders and agents and title and escrow and so many people that are going to be a part of the transaction. So
Yeah, so the value of the property at the time of inheritance is the value of their basis. Your basis is not taxable. So when the heir goes to sell the property, they get that step up in basis. So the previous owner's capital gain gets wiped out,
right.
and they have less of a tax liability.
Hi, I'm Mike Grambow with J&J Financial, and welcome back to the Mortgage Lounge. Today we have exchange resources, and we're going to talk 1031 exchanges, which is really critical if you're a real estate investor, a way for you to save on capital gains or rather defer, right? So we have Monique Wilson-Kaiser with us. She's been in the business for 30 years, so she is obviously a wealth of knowledge on the subject. And then Michael Spring, who is a VP, correct, of Exchange Resources and has been with them for 8 years. So thank you both for being here.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll just kick it off. If I think you may have a disclaimer you have to say, and then also just tell us a bit about Exchange Resources.
Sure. Yeah. So we can't give tax or legal advice. Always tell our clients to, especially before the exchange, to meet with their tax advisor or their legal advisor. So everything we're talking about today is just a friendly conversation, pretty casual. And Monique, do you want to maybe tell them a little bit about 1031 and ERI?
Yeah, 1031 exchanges are for deferment of capital gains on investment property. Um, the tax does not go away, so you keep kicking the can down the road until you pass away and leave it to your heirs who get a step up in basis. So it's a great estate strategy.
And when you say step up in basis, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so the value of the property at the time of inheritance is the value of their basis. Your basis is not taxable. So when the heir goes to sell the property, they get that step up in basis. So the previous owner's capital gain gets wiped out,
Right.
and they have less of a tax liability when they go to sell it.
Yeah, which is so big, right? It's like if you had bought it for 200 and it was worth $1 million, if you had sold it, you would have had 800,000 plus or minus a few things, of course, right? But that gets completely wiped. So very cool. So what qualifies for a 1031 exchange?
Long-term investment real estate. So ideally 2 years held for investment, but nothing is in the code. So some people will say a year and a day puts it into long-term. Any real estate held for investment, vacant land, commercial, residential, to 1031 into another investment property of equal or greater value. You defer that gain into the new property and don't recognize any tax liability.
Very nice. So people ask, it's like for like, right? But I think that's much broader than what people realize. So you have a single family home, you want to sell it, buy another investment property to defer the gains. So you mentioned vacant land. What if I wanted to buy a commercial building?
Any real estate held for investment purposes, so it's not your primary residence, you're holding it for long term, you're not buying it to flip it, would qualify. So you can sell vacant land, buy commercial, you can sell multifamily and buy into a Delaware Statutory Trust, which is like a REIT, but it qualifies for deferment. So it's very passive, hands off. You don't have to maintain or deal with tenants. Any of that would qualify. You can also sell multiple properties to buy one larger property, or vice versa. Sell one large property and buy multiple properties anywhere in the United States or U.S. territory.
Perfect.
The concept of 1031-2 is actually pretty interesting. It goes back about 102 years. So what the country was experiencing 102 years ago was you had all these farmers that held on to property from generation to generation. And of course, food production is important if you want your population to grow and be healthy and happy. And so the farmers were running into an issue where they held this property for a long time, but they couldn't sell it and move on to another plot that might generate additional crops or better crops. Because if they sold it, they had all this capital gain that they had to pay taxes on. So it didn't make any financial sense for them. So they actually appealed to Congress directly over 100 years ago and said, we have this problem. You've got to figure out a way to help us with the tax code. So Congress listened and they incorporated that. And 1031 has really changed a lot since that time. Back then, Congress said, okay, we're going to change the tax law, but you have to buy and sell the same property on the same day. You have to do a concurrent closing. And over time, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there's just been a lot of changes through to to 1031 directly into the law, what you can and cannot do. So the ideal concept, though, with 1031 is to help investors and people using real estate in productive ways to keep reinvesting in real estate. Because as we all know, the real estate industry in the United States, it's just an economic boost to everyone. It impacts everyone. Whether you're in lending or you're a power washer, you're an inspector, all those things, and even Monique and I in the 1031 world, we all benefit from real estate. So that's the main concept, is to keep investors in real estate, defer the gain until either they sell a property, they don't 1031, or they pass away. That kind of crass term, defer, die, but it's real with the step-up basis, as Monique was talking about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know the history of that with
Yeah.
farmers. It makes a lot of sense. I've heard you guys say that it's not a loophole. It's
Not a
in the tax code. It's meant to be used.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And I love the point too about how this benefits everybody, because I'll see online people say like, oh, these investors getting away with not
Yeah.
paying their taxes. And it's like, well, the property they're selling is going to have a step up from the person that buys it. So the county is going to be collecting more property tax
Right.
on it. And to your point, you have lenders and agents and title and escrow and so many people that are going to be a part of the transaction. So it does help the economy.
Big time.
It frees up inventory because people are more willing to sell, and more inventory typically is a good thing for the real estate business. So yeah, I feel like it's a great tool.
It is. And I would say at Exchange Resources, most of our clients really own one investment property. Typically, they inherited it along the way, or maybe they were, they got divorced, they kept the property, then they got remarried, and that's very, very common. So the misconception that this is only for the wealthy is not true. This is usually the investment property that they're exchanging is the biggest retirement tool for the taxpayer. So it is not a loophole. And actually, there was an Ernst & Young study done a couple years ago, which showed that 80% of exchangers do one exchange in their lifetime, and then they sell the property in their lifetime, and they actually pay taxes. That's 80%. So it really is not a loophole. It's just a tool for deferment.
Yeah, that's so good. All right, so there's 4 basic steps to an exchange, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to touch on those?
Sure. Well, the first step would be to contact Exchange Resources and actually open the exchange and get everything set up prior to the close of escrow. So the exchange has to be set up prior to title changing from the original taxpayer to the new owner. The second step would be there's 2 deadlines in the exchange, which start the day that the property closes escrow. And you have 180 days, that's known as the exchange period, to close and take title to anything that the taxpayer identifies. So the exchange period is 180 days. The first 45 days are the identification period. And Monique, do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the issues you see with identification?
Yeah, so you want to buy a replacement property that is equal or greater in value to what you're selling. And to identify that property, you get up to 3 properties of any value, or if you're going to diversify by multiple properties, you can identify up to 200% of what you sold. So if you sold for 3.5 million, you can identify any number of properties as long as the total combined value does not exceed 7 million. And then you can pick several of those properties to go into. But you do want to purchase equal or greater in value to have a full deferment. If you do buy down in value, you just pay tax on that.
Yeah. So in your example, you identify up to 7 million, which is great. That's a lot of property. Um, but to get the full benefit, quote unquote, you're only exchanging 3.5 million.
Right.
Yeah.
You want to purchase at least 3.5 million.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So we talked about property value. So and then we have closing costs associated with this.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of people, as Monique was saying, there's some confusion about what is my reinvestment value. And of course, we always say that's a great question for your tax advisor or your legal advisor. But in general, you want to purchase replacement property for the same amount that you sold for, minus the non-recurring closing costs. That term non-recurring is huge. So if you have taxes every month or you have HOA bills every month, those are recurring, not non-recurring. So usually the biggest non-recurring things that people can deduct from their reinvestment value would be commission paid to the agent or broker, escrow fees, title fees, even the exchange fee, things that are non-recurring. So they get their final settlement statement, look at that, subtract those items. That gives them their rough reinvestment value. But once again, even then, they really want to go and sit down with their CPA and just say, this is our plan. This is what we think we should be buying for. Do you agree? Is there anything in our tax history for this year that we should be aware of, that maybe we should buy up a little, buy down a little? And so it's always just very wise to really have that conversation with your tax advisor.
And that makes sense to me, right? Because you want to be exchanging the gain, the money that's made. So if you have these fees, well, that's money off the top, right? And I think it brings up another point. People think about exchanges where, once again, it's the gain, not the equity or the proceeds from the sale. Because if a person bought a $500,000 property cash versus a person who bought the same property and financed it, those are different proceeds when they sell, but the gain from original purchase price is the same.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a good point. I mean, you're right. A lot of people do pay cash for a lot of these properties. But as far as lending goes, I mean, that's something that often gets missed. We talk about cash boot and also mortgage boot in our industry. So cash boot is when the exchanger has leftover cash proceeds. Maybe they bought down in value. Maybe they got a loan that was too high. And so as the 1031 company, the IRS only allows us to wire funds that's needed to close. If the loan amount's too high, maybe there's some money left over. Sometimes they're okay with that. Sometimes we have a quick conversation with the taxpayer to reduce the loan amount. Sometimes, though, what happens is, especially with rates changing so much in the last couple of years, oftentimes a taxpayer will have an encumbrance on the old relinquished property, and it may not make financial sense for them to get another encumbrance of the same size. So if they buy down in value and let's say their loan amount on the old property was 150, but they get a new loan amount for 100, they've got a $50,000 variance that they'll be subject to tax on. So in a 1031 exchange, you've got to roll over all of the cash proceeds and get another loan of equal or greater value, or bring in new cash to offset any loan that you don't kind of replace. And so those are things that are also an important conversation that the 1031 company needs to have, but also the taxpayer needs to talk about. So you got to replace your loan amount either with a new loan, new cash, but also use up all the exchange money for full tax deferral.
Yeah, I think it's just really pointing to how this is really a team effort,
It is.
right? You have to have an escrow company that knows how to handle these. You have to get with the exchange company early because there's going to be lots of questions, and you're going to defer a lot to the CPA, so they need to know what's going on. And then obviously the lender is going to play a part in all this as well.
Yep.
And I'm surprised at how many investors don't consult their tax advisor before they list their property for sale. Oftentimes they want to know, how much do I have to purchase for? Well, that's easy, equal or greater. What should I purchase? If you don't know your tax liability on this property that you're selling, it kind of makes it difficult to know whether or not the properties you're identifying are going to be worth the investment. Because if it's not a property you absolutely love, but you're buying it just to avoid paying capital gains, and you don't know what those capital gains are, You might be buying
Yeah.
a money pit
Yeah.
just for no reason. So also investors could have capital losses carried forward from previous years, and those capital losses can offset capital gain. So they can talk to their CPA, see if, if they sell a property for 750, but they have 200,000 in capital losses carried forward, they could probably buy for 550 and not recognize any capital gains. So they really need to have that conversation just for their own knowledge.
Sometimes they think, oh, I'm saving some money in consulting fees with the CPA. But as Monique just pointed out, sometimes it's just worth it to spend a little bit to get proper advice, proper planning. It just never really helps things.
We should have had a fourth seat here for a CPA, right? I mean, as your initial disclaimer, like this is the tax code.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, the tax guy
advisors.
is the one that needs to, confirm that what we're doing here is going to make sense, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Great. Let's talk about vesting in a 1031.
Vesting is huge. So there's a lot of bad information out there just in regards to, okay, I own the property this way, but then I report the income a different way. So, how you're on title, it's how you're on title. You just look at the title report. That's how you own the property. But again, like you were just saying, this is about taxes. And so let's say I own a property under a family trust, but then my wife and I report all the income on our joint return. So we own the property one way, but we're reporting it a different tax way. So at the end of the day, what really matters is who's the taxpayer selling the property. And whoever the taxpayer is has to remain consistent on the replacement property, or also known as the upleg property. The IRS and California Franchise Tax Board, they really want to see that the same taxpayer that sells stays the same taxpayer that takes title. So I'll just use that example again. Let's say my wife and I own a relinquished property under our trust, but we file on our joint. We could potentially, with our tax advisor's input, take title to the new property. Usually we should keep it as the same way we were reporting it. I know, with Monique's experience, and by the way, Monique taught me everything I know literally about 1031. Monique has this conversation every day with people who run into vesting issues.
Yeah, and oftentimes either the lender wants them to have an LLC to protect them, or they want to take title under an LLC just for added protection. As long as the LLC is a disregarded entity, it's not going to file a separate tax return. It's not a tax-paying entity. The owner of the relinquished property is the sole member of the new entity. They can purchase under that LLC, the lender's approval. But to the IRS, we're all a number. You're either a tax ID number or social security number. That is who has to carry forward that gain into the new replacement property.
This is, I think, the biggest piece on the lending side, right? Because we can work together on loan amounts. I think most loan officers can handle that. But it's a blind spot unless you know in advance about this vesting piece that it has to match, right? Because usually it's like, I'm just qualifying the loan and who's on title, and it's not really a big deal. So then like a couple of things have come up for me with this. One, LLCs, I'll say the lending industry is behind in this, because if you ask any any estate attorney, they're going to say investment properties go into an LLC, and really each one should have their own LLC. That's what they're going to tell you. Most loan programs do not allow you to fund into an LLC, right? You have to fund into your personal name, and then after the fact, transfer it in, and there's rules around that. There's only a handful of loans that even let you move it or fund into an LLC, right? So you have to be aware of that. Do you have programs that fund into LLCs? And we haven't talked yet about reverse exchanges, but sometimes accommodators want them to fund into the name of the accommodator, right? So there's even fewer investors that do then you have access to the program. I had a case recently where the person doing the exchange was the only one on title, right? So we needed to have him be the only one on title on the new purchase, but he didn't qualify on his own, and just there wasn't a program for him. But he had a co-signer that he could use. So we did a loan program where we had the two people on loan, but the person who was really helping to qualify, he was not going to be on title. And we had an investor that allowed for that. There were a lot of people very confused by that. They're like, what do you mean he's not on title? Like, I promise you, like, we've done the homework on this. It works. So I think that from a lending perspective, like, that's where you have to have the right programs and just the right knowledge in order to get it done. I think the last thing on the lending side is that, you talked about if it's a single member LLC, you're a disregarded entity. So once again, maybe an inexperienced lender can say, oh, I need to do this into an LLC. And that's the one exception. It's like, no, actually, you can do a conventional loan, fund it into the personal name, because since it's going through their personal tax returns, it's going to
Right.
be okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was my time to shine in this whole presentation. It's like, that's the
Well,
one thing.
You did good.
I
Yeah.
mean, like you were saying, it is a group effort, and we do run into issues with lenders just not understanding kind of the process and the rules and regulations. So choosing the right lender, especially for us, it makes our job easier when we're working with a lender that knows what we're looking for, what needs to happen to ensure that we have a smooth, you're not lending too much,
Mhm.
you're not requiring this, you're not giving them bad information. So your lender really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Let's talk about timeline. I think that this is one of the sticking points. Just off the bat, it's like I've had people come and say, "Oh, I sold a property, and I think I'm going to do a 1031 exchange." Not on this property,
Yeah.
or not, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, tell me about how the timeline works.
Yeah, so you have to set up your exchange before you close escrow on the property you're selling. I say 2 weeks, set up your exchange 2 weeks prior to closing is sufficient. Um, it's best to just open it when you get under contract with a buyer. Once you close escrow on that property, you have 45 days to identify the replacement property. There's no extending that 45 days. It's calendar days, so holidays, weekends. You can only purchase what you identify within that 45 days. And then you have 180 days from close of escrow to close on that identified property.
Okay. Yeah. So I think lining up the identification of replacement properties and keeping these timelines is probably the trickiest part of an exchange.
Yeah, big time. And it's also there's a specific form that you have to use, and we provide that to our clients. And they list the properties. Sometimes they'll list the values. They sign, they date it, send it into us. We date stamp it, say we received it, save a copy in your file. The reason why we tell our clients to save a copy of the ID form is because that is the first form that an FTB auditor or an IRS auditor is going to pull from the exchange file to try to disallow the exchange. So getting your 45-day form into us on time is really important, but making sure that you properly fill it out and put down the full property address, make it unambiguous, signing it, dating it, all those things really matter. So hiring a QI that looks at that and walks you through, that's really important.
This piece is interesting to me because I had a client that had about 6 properties that she wanted to exchange all at once, and you realize that it's just a timeline disaster, right? To your point you made earlier, at least we don't have to do it concurrently anymore, right? But I think real estate investors will think about consolidating. You sell 2 small properties to buy a bigger one for efficiency purposes, right? You have one property manager and one set of meters, or it's a little bit easier if you have a 6 unit than 2-3 units, right? But this is another reason. If you want to exchange it, then now you just have one property you have to make the timeline work on instead of 2 or 3. And then even I think later in a career, if you're not going to have heirs that are going to pick up all these properties for you, it's a lot easier for them to sell one property than it's going to be to sell 6 properties.
That's true.
Right. So I think that, I mean, there's obviously other strategies to consider, but this is a big place where real estate consolidation makes a lot of sense.
It definitely makes estate planning easier, and we see that a lot with people selling multiple properties. And Monique already mentioned the Delaware Statutory Trust as an option, which makes estate planning easier too. But we are seeing a lot of consolidation. People are just trying to make things a little bit easier, and people are moving. People are moving out of state, out of California. They want to manage properties near them, so we are seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having more and more investors want to sell multiple properties. And like you said, the timing is critical. So one strategy that I recommend for them is to list your properties and pick a target close date for all of those properties. And when you're countering with the buyer, when you first get the offer, maybe put in an extension of 30 days or making it contingent upon finding suitable replacement property. 2 30-day extensions just so you can keep those target close dates on all relinquished properties within a couple of weeks of each other. You don't have to close them at the same time, but your 45 days begins when you close the first property. And if you need proof of funds when you're making offers to show that you're a solid buyer and you have only sold one of your properties, that can be a challenge. So
Yeah.
you do kind of want to target those close dates to be pretty close to one another.
Do you have any recommendations for real estate agents to help explain these things when you're placing an offer? If there's certain things that they can just either frame what's going on or present to the listing agent that's going to make it a little bit more digestible and not so intimidating of like, what's a 1031 exchange and why do you have to sell these properties and what's going on?
Yes, call us. No.
Well, and you actually, unfortunately, I've had this call a couple times where somebody will call me and said, the other party found out I was doing a 1031 exchange and I identified the property that they're selling. They know that it's on my ID form. They know I'm past my 45 days. And so they're jacking up the price. And so
Yeah.
that's something that we
Oh,
always
I
tell
see.
people, yes, there's a point where we have to disclose this, but that's after, you've signed the purchase agreement, you're in escrow, everything's okay. So, some holding your cards a little close to your chest in the beginning is not always a bad idea. But I know, she's talked to 1,000 agents about, here's what you do, here's how you can help your client kind of navigate this.
And communicate, keep your cards close to your chest, but communicate because you don't know what your buyer's situation is. They may love to have extra time to close and get all their ducks in a row. Same with the property you're buying. Oftentimes people will get under contract on their purchase property right away before they've closed escrow on their sale, which is a great strategy because now you've removed the stress of identifying. But if your buyer backs out or your buyer has a delay, now you're scrambling to get an extension or, so keep open communication with all of your agents, all of your parties. Let them know what's going on. I usually tell realtors, don't schedule the purchase to close the day after the sale closes, especially if your buyer's getting financing, because there could be a delay. And now you've got to try to get an extension where you could always put the close date 2 weeks out or sooner. And if everything closes on time, great. You can close 2 weeks early,
Mm-hmm.
but leave yourself some room.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in the transaction, but I was helping an agent with a tricky scenario where somebody was doing a 1031 exchange and they needed this property, or she was selling the property, so they had to buy this property. And she was concerned that they were going to back out of the deal. And I was like, this is the one time where you could feel pretty good. Like if they don't buy this and it ruins their exchange because now they're outside their window of identifying, like they're going to lose a ton in their taxes. So they're their most motivated
Solid.
buyer that you're going to have
Yes,
right now to
absolutely.
close this. And they did close. It was a little bit of a headache, but not because of the exchange, but because of other things that were happening. So we talked a little bit about boot. Is there anything else you want to touch on about that?
No, I mean, it's definitely just not something I want to scare people about. We see partial exchanges where people decide for various reasons to buy down in value, or sometimes they'll call and they say, "Hey, Monique, we're selling this property, but I want to hold back maybe 25,000 to pay down some credit card debt," for example. We hear that almost every day. So you can do a partial exchange, but you're subject to tax on the difference. And that's just something that we want our clients to be aware of up front. The last thing we want is for them at come tax reporting time to get a surprise bill and just say, why didn't anyone tell me about this? And so we'll have the general conversation, but we'll say, by the way, make sure you loop in your tax advisors so they can look at your entire tax history for that year. It's all the income you had, not just the exchange. That's just one piece of your tax history for the year.
Yeah.
So definitely don't want to scare people. It's okay to buy down in value.
Yeah.
Also, another thing I want to mention is oftentimes somebody will be selling their primary residence, which does not qualify for 1031, but they put an ADU on it several years ago that they've been renting out and claiming as investment. They can 1031 the ADU value. Usually they report a percentage of their primary residence as investment. That is the percentage that would go into the exchange. So they would receive their proceeds from the sale of their primary residence and exchange the proceeds from the investment portion. Or if they live in a triplex and they rent out 2 of the units, you can do a partial exchange and receive your proceeds from your primary residence. And then you just have to purchase another investment property with the proceeds in the exchange or the portion of the mortgage. But so that would be also a partial exchange, but there would be minimal to no tax liability depending on what their gain is for their primary residence, because they get the universal exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
they
having our fourth seat would be helpful right now. But with the triplex scenario, so like you said, there's an exclusion for primary residence. So they, I know you defer to a CPA, but they get partial for the piece they're living in, and then if they wanted to go buy another investment, they can exchange the rest of it. That's
the
As long as
121
they report
exclusion.
it. Yeah.
So 121 is 250,000 for an individual, 500,000 for a married couple filing
for
jointly
primary residence.
for primary, and then they can also combine Section 1031 for investment if it matches, the triplex example.
Yeah, I have one right now. I have two actually where they lived in the property for multiple years, but they moved out 2 years ago. And so they're going to take the 500,000 from the sale of the property for their primary residence and exchange the balance of the sale because they've been renting it out for 2 years, but they've occupied it 2 out of the last 5.
Mm-hmm.
So they're getting advantage of both.
Yeah. Well, and on the bit about the partial boot too, once again, confirm with your fourth seat that usually capital gains tax is much less than your income tax. I don't know if people always consider that too. If you've held the property, I think it's for 2 years, right? It's
the long term.
Yeah. So it's not as bad maybe
Right.
as what they're initially thinking.
Yeah.
And the reason they call it boot is actually kind of funny. Going back over 100 years to those farmers, allegedly the lore is that they would hide the excess cash in their boots and hide it from the tax authorities. So it's just kind of a fun little thing.
That's so cool. I always thought it was such a random turn. Like,
very random.
What's the boot? Okay. All right. It's where you keep the cash. All right. But so typically when people hide cash in boots, you cannot use those for real estate transactions. So this is the
Right.
Don't do that.
Okay. So there's a couple of different types of exchanges, right? Do you want to talk about those?
So we have the straightforward exchange where you sell a property. You have 180 days to close on the replacement. We have a simultaneous exchange where you close them on the same day or maybe the day after your purchase.
Which I would think is the dream child, but probably also the least common.
I feel like when I started, we
stress.
saw them a lot more, but not so much anymore.
Okay.
Coordinating everybody's money but then we have the build to suit exchange. If you're going to do improvements with your 1031 proceeds on the replacement property, you can do a build to suit exchange. They're complicated, they're expensive, but it is a possibility. The accommodator has to take title to the replacement property at the close of escrow because improvements don't qualify for deferment. So the improvements don't qualify after you've taken title. So the accommodator takes title. The improvements are identified and completed within the 180 days. And then the accommodator deeds the property to the investor. And the value of the property at that time is the value of their exchange.
So this isn't just necessarily ground up. You're saying if you buy a fixer.
Yeah.
And you bought it for 6, but after you fix it up, it's worth 8.
Yeah. You sold for 8. You found a property that needs a lot of work for 6. You put a couple $100,000 into it. The day you take title, those improvements are done. You get credit for the purchase price plus the improvements that have been completed. And now you've increased your exchange value.
Interesting.
And then there's the reverse exchange where you purchase your replacement property first. You have 180 days to close on your relinquished property. Those are also expensive and complicated. But if you are looking to do a reverse exchange, you do need to set that up at least 2 or 3, 4 weeks before the purchase closes. Because again, we have to set up a title holding entity to park one of the properties, either the property you're buying, if you're buying all cash, no lender involved, or we take title to the property you're going to sell if you are getting financing, because you'll have to take title to the property you're buying.
Yeah, and I know that they're more expensive, but in the grand scheme of it, I don't think that they're actually that more expensive, right?
Well, and it's a write-off, but yeah,
Yeah.
they're 8 to 10,000.
And the way we kind of phrase it is that you're essentially paying $8,000 to $10,000 for a property that you really want.
Yeah.
Because in a reverse exchange, you're acquiring your replacement property first, and the 45 and 180 work in reverse. So you have 45 days to identify what you're relinquishing, which for most investors is not that complicated.
Right.
180 days to get that relinquished property sold and title transferred back.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the build to suit. One of the things that makes it a little bit more complicated is you have 45 days to identify all the improvements that you wish to make to the property. And that 180-day period, that still matters. So you have 180 days to get all the improvements completed. So that means that if you are replacing all the windows, for example, and you want that value added to your exchange, let's say there's a delay with that build to suit and those windows come in late and you're on day 181 and they're not installed, technically that doesn't apply to the 1031. So it just, again, just requires careful planning and consideration.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. With the reverse exchange, so I'll say that it's great that you guys will take title of the property that's being sold, because not all accommodators will do that.
Mhm.
And now the lender needs to have a loan where you're funding into the name of the accommodator, which is usually a higher cost because there's not a lot of people that are going to do that on the lending side.
Yeah.
And then you've now sold the property, and you have to put it towards the new property, right? So another piece in the lending that I have to pay attention to is you have to have a loan that will allow for that, right? Because a lot of loans, we want you to make 6 or 7 payments before making any substantial payment towards the principal, right? So there's things that you need to pay attention to.
That's why your lender matters.
Yes.
It really does, because we run into that problem where some lenders will hear reverse exchange and they'll go, not interested, bye, he'll hang up the phone.
Yeah.
So that's why you're a good lender who knows what they're doing matters.
Yeah.
There's another type of exchange, which is a hybrid exchange. So let's say you find a property for 600,000 and you love it and you want it, and your property isn't sold yet. And let's say you're selling your property for $1 million. Well, that $600,000 property is not going to be enough, but we can assign ourselves into, using this example, essentially 60% of your relinquished property would be a reverse exchange. Once your relinquished property closes, 40% would be a straightforward exchange.
Oh, interesting.
So you'd have 45 days to identify another property for 400,000 or more.
Right.
And so that's a hybrid.
Yeah, that's cool.
We're not afraid of the complicated
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah, I
As well.
think so. At the end of the day, if you have an investment property, you can sell it, and there's lots of ways
There's
to
lots of ways.
to defer the gains on it. Yeah, very cool. Did you want to talk more about capital gains?
Yeah, I mean, I think really just to kind of cap that portion, I mean, if the taxpayer that doesn't do a 1031 exchange, you're going to essentially be paying between, depending on your income, 35, 40%, give or take, to the Fed and to the state. Just depends on where you're domiciled. That's a lot of money to pay when you can utilize the tax code and actually defer that money over to a new property. Just roll it over into a new property and just build your portfolio, which again is the entire point of 1031. So an investor that doesn't know about it, or they get bad advice from a real estate professional who doesn't tell them, oh, you've got to set this up before you close, they're missing out. And this is, in my opinion, probably one of the strongest provisions in the tax code. And we actually have to, as an organization, we work with the Federation of Exchange Accommodators. And Section 1031 in the tax code gets scrutinized all the time because they really want to kind of dampen this. Some legislators look at it as a way to raise tax revenue. And so the investors that are smart, that work with a good lender, a good escrow officer, and a good QI, they have that powerful tool in their tool belt to really build a portfolio. So the investor that does it, great. The ones that don't are really missing out.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, call us. We do presentations all the time. We're happy to educate your agents, and that way they know what to ask when they get a new listing or a new buyer. They can benefit them.
Yeah.
I think we've talked quite a bit about step ups. So you have what's happening with the baby boomer wealth.
There's this huge shift, and it kind of depends on, what your source of information is. But there's some experts out there who think that because of the boomer generation, holds about maybe $80 trillion worth of wealth in the United States that, sadly over time, my parents are baby boomers, that in the next 10, 15 years, a lot of those folks will pass on. And you've got all of this wealth. They call it the great wealth shift that is shifting from the boomer generation to other generations, whether it's their children, grandchildren, or whatnot. And so our message to our friends in real estate, whether you work in real estate or you're an investor, is be prepared for this great wave of change that's coming. One thing that Monique and I do constantly is we do a lot of education. We talk to escrow officers, lenders, title folks, and real estate agents, and just say, this is coming. Be prepared for it. If you're knowledgeable, that really helps. But we are seeing just this great transformation of wealth, and it's happening right now. So the folks that are kind of seeing it, being prepared, and talking to the right people, they have an advantage. And so educate yourself, ask questions, go out and meet folks. That's the best way, I think, just to prepare for this.
And I think what you're getting at too is if you have a large real estate portfolio, this is the time for talks about the consolidation.
Yeah.
It's times to talk about the DSTs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we work with some really great DST companies who do a great job of just making sure that they're looking at these properties, they're doing their due diligence, making sure that these are safe investments. It's still real estate, which is great, but all types of real estate have their pros and cons and risks. So just like with the lender that you hire or the exchange company that you hire, the DST company that you go with matters. So you want to go with somebody that's reputable, somebody that has maybe been in the game for a while, and certainly ask about their due diligence process.
Yeah, and we haven't spelled out the DST, but it's essentially it's a portfolio that you buy into, right? That's still real estate, like you say. So we've talked a lot about in the inheritance situation, but there's also the situation where people just don't want to be a landlord anymore.
They don't.
Right?
And that's the beauty of it. You're
Yeah.
hands off. You get your mailbox money every month, and somebody else manages it. They pay the mortgage, they pay the taxes. And one day you get a letter saying that property is being sold. Do you want to 1031 again, or do you want to cash out? You get the same step up when your heirs inherit it. And it's
pretty simple. And you're
Yeah.
buying really interesting property. A lot of this is student housing. Sometimes it's medical facilities. Sometimes it's just triple net lease, multi-housing, multifamily housing. So there's all different types of DST. Sometimes it's Amazon or Home Depot, things like that. So there's lots of different options for people that are interested.
Quickly, I think we've talked a lot, but so I get the question quite a bit. I haven't identified the property. My timeline's coming due. Can I just put the money into a DST
Yeah.
and then go buy another property later?
Sometimes people will say they'll go, that's my Hail Mary. I'm coming up on day 40 of the exchange. I've got 5 days left. I haven't found anything. I've literally had people on the phone say, I'm going to go to Redfin or Zillow, pick out 3 properties and cross my fingers. But sometimes what they'll do instead is that they'll call the DST rep and they'll go, what can you fit me in? Or I might have some cash left over, some boot after the exchange. Can we park that money in some investment? So DSTs are great. Just a friendly reminder, DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trusts, are very different from REITs. So a real estate investment trust, you get shares, and that is not exchangeable. REITs are great for some investors, but they're very different. So some people confuse the two, but DSTs, exchangeable, REITs are not.
Okay.
Yeah, they're great for a backup property too. If it's day 40 and you're not real sure about the property you're in escrow on and you want to have a backup option, you can identify a DST, and, if something goes south on your replacement, you've got that safety net.
Sleep better at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And then I think we talked about the built-in exit strategy. So other than that, we'll put your contact information up where everybody can reach the two of you. And then, we got rid of the most asked questions, but off the top, what are some of the most asked questions about 1031?
Values, which we've kind of gone through. Just how much do I need to purchase for? Again, that takes planning, consideration. Look at what you're selling. Talk to your tax advisor. Vesting's always coming up. How do I need to buy? So vesting's really important. Those are things that'll kill the exchange. Not understanding the identification or the 180-day period, those things come up a lot. We get questions about that all the time.
Yeah, I would say the most important thing to remember is the 45 days to identify, because that's set in stone. It can't be extended, and it'll make or break your exchange.
Yeah.
Um,
Second homes and vacation homes, normally they don't qualify. Again, real estate's great, but you have to hold it for investment purposes. If it's a second home
Personal
and
use.
personal use, it doesn't qualify. That's not held for investment purposes. It's personal use.
What
Uh,
about short-term rental?
well, that's an investment, so really depends on, how much you're using it versus how much you're renting it and really using it. But, even vacant land, some people go, well, I'm not getting income from that vacant land.
Right.
It's just sitting there, but I'm speculating, hoping it goes up. That's fine. You're holding it, hoping that the value goes up and that Walmart will come by and buy it, for example, and you'll make a nice profit. But if you are camping on it, or if you're parking your, let's say you own a
Storage.
construction company and you're parking your trucks on it, that's personal use. That can disallow it. So those are just some of the bigger things, I think.
Can I buy a property for my kids to live in?
You certainly can, as long as your children are paying you fair market value. So we run into that quite a bit. So parents will, the kids go off to college and they go, instead of paying someone else's mortgage, let's invest in a property and have my kid live there. That's great, as long as your college student is paying you fair market value rent. Oftentimes that's not the case. But renting to family members is very common, and it's okay, especially as we see, with the boomers retiring, they sometimes their children want them to live with them in an ADU, for example, but you have to charge them fair market value rent.
I have an investment property, but I haven't had it for 2 years. Can I exchange it?
Well, Monique touched on this earlier. She said that, and it's true, there's nothing in the tax code that says 2 years. There's a lot of, I would say, tax rules that they like that 24-month period. So there's nothing set in stone. Most CPAs that are conservative that we talk to say 2 years. I've been on the phone with some that say, I'm okay with a year. Our response, and again, I learned this from Monique, she would basically say, what's your comfort level with risk? How risky do you want to be
Yeah.
with this? And if you're okay with it, you're the taxpayer.
We'll do your exchange,
Do your exchange.
Right.
but we're not
There's-
approving it.
There's layers to this question, right? Because they could ask you, and then it's like, well, you got to talk to your tax person,
Yeah.
and then the tax person's going to say, we'll see what the IRS says.
Yeah, or the
Right?
tax,
So-
sometimes the tax advisor will say, call your exchange company, and that's okay. And then we'll say, sure, get them on the phone, and let's kind of come together and then have a nice conference call about it.
And I think that this most commonly comes up because people will ask, can I exchange my primary? And the answer is no. So the next question is, well, how long does it need to be a rental for? Right.
The legal word, again, Monique taught me this, would be intent. If somebody calls us or somebody emails us and they say, hey, I want to do an exchange in this property, my intent is to hold on to it for a year or two and then move into it. And we just go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't say stuff like that. Don't put it in writing, but certainly don't talk about it. Intent, it's a legal word, but it really matters. If your intent is to hold on to this for investment purposes, you're golden. You want to be really careful about what you say, what you put in writing, as far as if you're going to plan to move into the property, that really doesn't qualify, and that's really disallowable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, any closing thoughts or things you want to share?
No, but please call us if you're just even curious. We have people that call us that are in an exchange with another company. They'll call us with questions. We're open to help. I mean, that's what we do. We are the qualified intermediary that educates. It's really what we really have a lot of pride about. So just call us if you have questions.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here and sharing really a wealth of knowledge. I learned a lot about farming and boots, so that was great. And until next time in the Mortgage Lounge, be well.